welcome to our weekly webinar. We're super excited to have you guys today. My name is Grace Bay. I'm CEO of Patton Logistics, and we have some really fun stuff to talk to you guys about. We've got Melody Sundwall here with us. She is our HR director, and she's going to talk about some super important things, state by state laws and best practices that we're going to walk through in just a little bit. So for those of you who have been to our weekly webinars before, you know the drill. For those of you who are new, we're going to go through some housekeeping first, and then we're going to dive into content. And as always, we'll do open Q&A at the end of the session, and feel free to ask any questions. It doesn't have to be HR related today, even though that's the topic we're going to be talking about. It can be anything that your heart desires that you want to ask questions about or open up the floor for discussion, conversation. So we'll dive into that towards the end of the session. But first, we're going to start with a little disclaimer. So Route Consultant is not endorsed by, is not recommended by Federal Express Corporation, FedEx Ground, or Amazon. Route Consultant is not sponsored by, is not approved by, is not associated with, and has no connection whatsoever with Federal Express Corporation, FedEx Ground, or Amazon. All right, so without further ado, I'd like to bring on Melody, our HR director. And Melody and I are going to walk through some HR content. I'm going to let her drive this because Lord knows I should not be in charge of anything related to HR in this operation. So I might chime in here and there, but Melody is going to drive this one. And for one other little piece before we dive in, just as always, we do a question of the day. Before you guys ask your questions, we like to ask you a question and get to know you a little bit better. So as you're thinking about your questions for today and loading them into the Q&A section of the bottom of your screen, we would love for you to answer our question of the day, which is, are you a beach vacation person or a lake vacation person? And if you would like to add color as to why you chose the option you chose, feel free to do that. So Melody, first, I will open this up by saying, are you a beach vacationer or a lake vacationer, and potentially why?
Yeah. Hi, everybody. I actually am a lake vacationer. I like the cabin in the woods and the quiet and the crickets and all the things. I don't mind the beach as long as there's a pool that I can go get into at the pool, but I would prefer the beach or I mean the lake and the forest and the trees. So
awesome. Well, I as you all can tell, am paler than a ghost. And so I will also choose lake, because if I'm at the beach, I have to make sure that I have a UV rated umbrella to not get sunburnt, and sunscreen on top of this. Yes, I have used a non-UV rated umbrella before, and I turned out looking like a lobster after 4 hours. So I'm going to go lake as well. And with that, now that you all know a fun fact about Melody and myself, Melody, what would you like to talk about today related to HR, all of the interesting topics that we love to discuss? I'm going to kick it over to you and let you run.
Yeah, well, it's funny because I think a lot of times when we do these, or when I talk to anybody, I will say, let's talk about anything that's not state specific, because it's too hard in these kind of settings to get into big topics, but that are really state centric. But I think at the beginning of the year, and I think there's so many new employment laws that I think it's just a really important topic to touch on. And so for those of you today on the call, I don't know where you are. I don't know, what part of the country you're in. So some of this may apply to you and some of it may not. But the examples that I'm going to give today is really just to kind of open the conversation and kind of open that mindset of when you're taking on a new organization, or when you are expanding your organization or going into a new state or any of those kind of things. It's just super important to take into account, what don't I know about this state? What are the special nuances about this state? And so, and even, not even just as a statewide, right? A lot of states will have different laws in different municipalities or counties. And so I just thought it would be fun if we spend a little bit of time today and we can kind of talk about some of those funny little quirky employment law things that are out there, because just as a random fact, there are over 5,000 new employment laws that are going into effect in 2023. So it keeps us all on our toes. And yet a lot of times you're like, how is that a thing? And why is that a thing? But okay, it is what it is. So, and a lot of times we pick on California because, well, California has a lot of little funny things, but there's a lot of other states out there that do quirky things. So I think a good place that we could start today is payroll, because payroll impacts every single person on this call. And normally you would think payroll's cut and dry, right? I take out the federal taxes, I take out the state taxes, I take out unemployment, I pay my drivers, we all move on, and we all do what we need to do. But then you have to come into, do the calculation of what are the state minimum wage laws in this particular state. There's a lot of states where minimum wage laws are below federal levels. There's a lot of states where it's above federal level, those kind of things. I said below, but it's not, it's above, not below. But when you do that, if you're paying by the day, you have to still do those calculations, and you have to just still see what that's going to come down to, right? And if you do all of that on a day-to-day basis, you may still be fine. But then what happens if they've had a safety violation and you want to do a deduction out of their paycheck? Then you still have to look into that. And what happens if they also have wage garnishments coming out? Okay, well, then that's going to impact how many deductions you can take out of their paycheck. And when you're doing all these calculations, then you run into, okay, well, I'm paying them by the day, but do they get overtime? And do they get overtime based on the week? Well, not if you're in California. If you're in California, you get overtime based on the day. And so you have to really dive into what all of those different things are. And it's just a really important one to kind of go through. And one of the ones, Grace, and we haven't talked about this in a while, but we get to know, and I don't know that if everybody on this call knows this or not, but wage reduction. If somebody leaves the company and does not give us notification, then we have the right to reduce their wages to minimum wage, right? So back to the math calculations, what's the minimum wage in your state? You have to figure that out. But if you have it in your handbook and you're in a state that allows you to do that, if you have a driver that doesn't give you notice and they just walk, then you can reduce their pay to minimum wage. You still have to take into account any garnishments. You still have to take into account all the deductions, and it still can't go below federal minimum wage, but you can still do that. And so it's just something to be really mindful of. And if that's a path that you want to take advantage of, or those payroll laws, well, then, make sure you document that in your handbook and make sure that you're in a state that allows you to do that. And then you're good to go. Now, be really careful, because if you don't have it documented and you do it, then that can cost you up to 3 times their salary or their payroll and the legal fees against it as well. So it doesn't always work out in your favor.
Yeah. And I will say that one specifically has been a super helpful one in our organization. And it's definitely not trying to be a gotcha moment, right? Like, we're not trying to hide this. We don't want this to be a secret. We're very open from the beginning of saying, this is in your handbook. This is a company policy. This is something we do to protect everyone here, right? It's nothing against you personally, but if you choose to put the operation in harm's way by walking off the job and not giving a notice, that has so many ripple effects that can negatively affect the operation, the other team members. And so it is something we put in place to try to protect against that and to recoup some of the additional costs that we have to put into the organization to respond and to continue to operate down a human being that we haven't planned for, right? So we've got to give bonuses to people who come in and help out and maybe run 2 routes on a given day, or go run additional volume. There's like real material costs that go into rebounding from someone not giving notice. So that's something that's been really helpful for us in our operation, but by no means should you try to hide it, or should it be a gotcha moment. It's something that's very clear, documented from the beginning, and it's really just to protect your operation and everyone who works in it.
Mm-hmm. So since we're talking about when we would use that payroll piece of the puzzle, and it's at a termination, so let's talk a little bit about some of the state laws around hiring and terminations, right? Normally you would think, okay, it's cut and dry. I know the gotchas, right? I know which things we don't touch. We don't touch race, religion, age, gender, the list kind of goes on. But did you know that in Michigan, you also cannot touch height and weight? Now, Not that you would genuinely do that anyway, right? And I'm not saying that anyone should ask or should question, but you have to be really mindful of how you're asking questions. So if you have a person who comes in for an interview that is short statured, you cannot just come out and say, how are you going to do this job? Like, how are you going to get the things off? You cannot do it. You cannot say it. You cannot ask it that way. And you might think it, but you cannot ask it, right? And so it's not one of those things that you can say, okay, well, I don't think you can do this. Like, you just can't. And so there's different gotchas. There's ways you can go about it, and there's ways you can ask different things for, if somebody comes in and they happen to be missing a limb, you can say something like, how would you perform the job? You need to demonstrate performing the job. And that's really all you can say and really all you can ask. But so in some states, they've just expanded on what those things are that you can ask and not ask, right? There's also things right now in the news, if anybody has seen it, there's a ton in the news right now about non-disclosures. And are they legal? Are they binding? Are they causing us to not have fair trade and fair, competition? And so there are states that are starting to put a little bit tighter restrictions on those. But right now, you've still got a fair amount of states that you can still use an NDA and you can have those things. And with our drivers, that's not going to be a big thing. But with your BCs, it would be a huge thing, right? If you have multiple operations and you have a director of operations, this is going to be a huge thing. And so you just, you want to check out, what can I do in my state? What can I not do in my state? And pay attention as that changes, because, for example, California, Colorado, there are restrictions around, okay, well, it could still be applicable if there's a merger or somebody's being bought. Okay, that's fine. There are others that are, well, it's still allowable if they make over $250,000. There's the other extreme that says you can't enforce it at all if they make under $20 an hour, right? So there's just all of those funny little nuances that states like to throw in there that make you go, okay, hold on. Let me go back. Let me check. Let me see what this says, right?
Melanie, where's the best place for someone to explore that? Because, even with the staff that you kind of kicked this off with so many changes coming just in 2023 for all of these state laws, it feels overwhelming as an employer when you're, especially an employer in this space where you're having to make decisions like that. And it's like 50 decisions at one time. And I don't always have time to stop and go research the laws and understand even what they're saying. So where is a good place to start just to get the cream of the crop and the meat and potatoes of what we need?
Okay, well, first I'm going to just do a shameless plug and say they should come see us, but that's beside the point, right? There's a couple of really easy places, and you're going to laugh when I say, but going to the DOL website, right? DOL.gov. And we don't think anything on a government website is easy to go through, but it's actually very clean on their website. And you can look things up by state. You can go pull up a map for state, for wage laws. You can go pull it up for transportation laws, which will cover seatbelts, because we've got states. Indiana's got a different seatbelt law than we have in other states, and so you can do different things like that. So the Department of Labor has a great website. You can literally go to Google and you can type in your state and type in employment law, and you will get a multitude of legal firms that pop up that have lots of online free resources. I mean, you really can take advantage of that. Just make sure that when you're doing that and you're looking at those, if you're not on the Department of Labor site or you're not on a true HR site, that you're looking at the date, because things change really, really quickly. And so you always want to look and make sure, I'm reading something and I'm seeing this law, but it's dated 2017. Do a little more research, right? Because chances are, if there was something updated in 2017, it's been updated since then. If you go and you find something that's been a steady Eddie for years and years and years, like at-will employment, right? That one hasn't really changed. I will point out, so for HR geeks like me that like to go dig into all the nitty gritty, I would be remiss if I didn't just say, that at will, in case anybody didn't know, started way back when it was really your will. You had free will to go work without joining a union. That's where at will came from. It has clearly morphed over time, and now it's known, right? You can work for me if you want to. You don't have to work for me if you don't want to. I don't have to hire you if I don't want to. I can hire you if I want to. Like it's pretty cut and dry there. But South Carolina has a funny rule, a funny law that says if you don't have that on the first page of your handbook with a signature line, then it's not at will. Okay, that doesn't, okay, I guess it is what it is. And so there's just these funny little things that can go through. But so when you go and you look at something even as steady as employment at will, right? And those laws haven't changed, there are ways that states are changing them and making little nuances for them. So honestly, when you go and you look those things up, make sure that you're looking at the year that was last updated.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, really good advice. Melody, what are the top, like, if you had to say the top 3 to 5 things that we just encounter on a regular basis in this space where we've been really glad we've had I's dotted and T's crossed in terms of the way we're doing things and the compliant way we're doing things? What do you feel like are the most common things that pop up? I know I'm putting you on the spot a little bit with this.
No, that's okay. Top of the first and foremost one is discrimination. Right? End of story. They will, drivers will come, and if you are terminating them, they will absolutely say you are discriminating against them for the sky is not blue enough today. Like it's just, it happens all the time. And so if anybody on this call has heard me before, my answers always be fair and consistent. Right? And so if you can say, this was our policy, right? We have it documented in our handbook. We have met all state legal obligations. This is not breaking the law that we are holding you accountable for this. We are not violating your civil rights by holding you accountable to these things. Then you're in the right. You're okay. You can do your termination, or you can do your hiring, or you can do your promotions, or all those things that you want to do. But literally discrimination against any of those protected pieces of the puzzle are always at the top of the list. And I mentioned seatbelt laws in Indiana a little bit ago, but that's a gotcha for us, right? Is drivers that do not want to wear their seatbelt. And so we're going to get safety violation dings. We're going to get in trouble because they're not doing this, but they will consistently push back and give grief and say, no, I am stopping between this, this regular pattern, and I'm not going above this speed. I don't have to wear my seatbelt. The seatbelt law over here says I don't have to do that. But guess what? Contractually, obligation, and as an organization, we've said you have to wear your seatbelt at all times if the vehicle is moving. And so that difference between how do we want to manage the company versus law, right, is a challenge in there. And I would guess that there's probably a few companies or business owners on the call that may be in states where you have marijuana that is now being legalized. And so that's going to become a problem. That was not a problem for us, but if I were going to put in what would be a top 2023 concern of mine, that would be at the top of my list for sure. Yeah. And one of the rubs too that you have in this space is the difference between state laws and DOT regulations, right? Mm-hmm. So especially for those of you who are looking to get into this space and you haven't done much with transportation or logistics, DOT is king. And the Department of Transportation has certain regulations that will supersede state laws. So for example, in a state like Colorado, where marijuana is legalized, yes, state law, you can use it recreationally, but DOT regulation, which trumps everything else, says you cannot have this in your system if you're operating a commercial vehicle. Now, some of you who may have researched Amazon, or you may be looking into Amazon, or maybe you are Amazon DSPs,
most of the trucks that operate in that network are under 10,000 pounds. And so technically, if you're operating a vehicle under 10,000 pounds gross vehicle weight, that is not considered a commercial vehicle. So you're not held to the DOT regulations. DOT applies to commercial driving in commercial vehicles, right? And so Amazon does not test for marijuana. And that's something that you can have in your system if you're driving a transit van that's under 10,000 pounds, because you are not under DOT regulation. You're not a commercial driver. So in the FedEx space, most of the vehicles that operate in this network are over 10,000 pounds. And most contractors want their trucks to be over 10,000 pounds, because I will say with an asterisk, most states will allow you to, they'll allow you to not have to pay overtime to drivers if they're operating vehicles over 10,000 pounds. There's an FMCSA exemption that allows you to just pay straight hourly, daily, whatever you pay, as long as it's within your labor law regulations, but you don't have to pay overtime. So there's some interesting rubs there where sometimes DOT is working in your favor, sometimes the state law is working in your favor, what supersedes what. But just as a good rule of thumb, DOT is king in this space, and whatever DOT says doesn't really matter what the state law is.
And just to piggyback on that is that you have the right as a business owner to then take it another level, right? So you've got federal law, you've got state law, you got federal law, you got DOT, and then you as a business owner get to say, I also will not allow X, Y, and Z. And so that's where you get to figure out within your state and the size of your company, because that's another piece of the puzzle. If your company's under 50 employees, that's one set of criteria. If it's under 15 employees, if you are a mom and pop that's just getting started and there's just a few of you, that's a whole different set of freedom that you have that you don't have once you hit, some of those other stages. And so you just have to really look into all of those things and decide how you want to run your business. And then what are the compliancy laws and DOT guidelines, along with the FedEx ground or Amazon contracts and those expectations, such as things like weapons in the vehicle, right? You're not going to have those in your truck, but I can have them in my car. If the car's locked, you can, but can you have it on company property, right? And that may be by state. It may be FedEx versus Amazon may have different criteria if it can even be in their car on, on property. So there's just all of those different things to kind of think about, go into. I know it sounds daunting. I promise it's not. I promise it's not, because a couple of pieces of the puzzle for that is if you go and let's say you're starting a new business and you're starting in a new state, if you go get a handbook that is written, a generic one for that state, it will have those basic state laws and federal guidelines already in it, right? So you can go and you can download those state handbooks, those, generic ones. If you go to the, human resource websites, you can download those. A lot of times, if you have employment protection insurance, then that, whether you have that through workers' comp coverage or whether you have it through your employment attorney, they can give you a generic handbook that then you can supplement and you can add to it what you want, those kind of things. But typically when you get those state generic ones, it'll come with all of those basics in there and you'll be good to go.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think that leads to one other thing I want to highlight, just about kind of like weighing risk, right? So in our roles as leaders in the organization, all of these things are about assessing risk. And there are certain compliance pieces. I won't say that they don't matter, but in relation to some bigger pieces, they're way down low on the totem pole, right? And the fire is just not even simmering yet. Like it is cold, cold, cold. The makings are barely there for a fire. And so as you're looking at this, we're talking about so many things, and there are so many I's, so many T's to make sure that you're dotting and crossing. And at a certain point, you have to say, my plate can only hold the hottest fires or warm to hot fires. And so I'm going to tackle those. It's the risk on some of these things is low, right? And so part of your job and what we can help you with is assessing those and helping prioritize those to say, at the beginning of this venture, you need to make sure that you're covered from a compliance standpoint on these things. And then once you got those down, we can start to shift focus to these things. And this is something Melody and I talk about all the time. You know, if you have a good HR person in your corner, they're going to show you all of the risks that are out there and help you assess that and say, this is a risk, but you know, the fines here are maybe like an additional week of salary for this person, right? Or an additional one paycheck or $500 or whatever. And it's just really not that big of a deal. Versus, you know, if you have a discrimination case on your hands and you have let someone go for race, religion, gender, any of those things, and that comes back on you, that could be a really expensive case, right? So, and Melody can talk about all of these things in depth. I'm out of my depth here on this one. But just wanted to point that out, that all of this is kind of like weighing risk and reward, and what is it going to take to implement these things, and where do I need to spend my time and my energy. I wanted to talk on just one more, Melody, and then I'll kick it back over to you. One thing that I really learned quickly and really just had no idea was even a thing when I started in this space, that I want to leave you guys with, is not necessarily with your current employees, but as you're talking to potential employees and candidates, whether you're doing the recruiting, whether you have a recruiter helping you and you're outsourcing. I did not know when I started talking to candidates that I couldn't ask them if they could pass a background check or if they could pass a drug test. I thought it would be helping them and me to just ask that question. Can you pass this? And if the answer is no, let's not waste my time or your time, right? That's one right off the bat. You should just know you can't ask. But this example is used to show you that you can still get to the same end result. You just have to ask it differently or present it differently. So instead of saying, can you pass a background check or can you pass a drug test? You may say something like, this approval process will require you to go through a background check and to take a drug test. Would you like to proceed? Right? Something like that. So it can be as simple as the way that you word things and the way that you present things. I know specifically in this space, Melody mentioned an example where you interview someone that you're worried about their ability to do the job physically. So Melody, I think that's probably one that we encountered the most, like in the field when we're bringing people on our team, is just like, oh my gosh, I don't know if you can do this. And it's not kind for me to put you in this position if I don't think you can, or if I'm worried you're going to get injured. So maybe would you spend just a second talking about how to deal with one of those, and then we'll transition into some open Q&A unless you have anything else you want to go over.
No, I think just to touch on the risk assessment real quick, for any of you that do have an HR person in your corner, or you're looking to hire an HR person, as an HR person, I will tell you right now, if you do not find someone that says, okay, what risk are you comfortable with? Right? I can tell you what the laws are and I can go give you a risk assessment. But at the end of the day, it's my job to come and say, here's the risk. You guys tell me where you want to fall. Here's the shades of gray, because I can assure you in the HR world, most of what we live in are a lot of gray area. And I love that I can partner with Grace and I can go and say, here's where we are. Here's where we should be. Right? We're kind of somewhere in the middle. And there's things that I'm not gonna lose sleep over. I'm not going to do it. I know that Grace is willing to take this risk, and therefore I can monitor it on the back end. And if I think it's escalating, then I'll bring it to her. And there's other things that if I come and say, this is a really big deal, then Grace knows if I'm coming to her and saying, this is a really big deal, then we probably have to do something different, right? Because I don't raise those panic flags very often, or I try not to, at least. But so you really have to have an HR partner that understands how you want to work and how you want to run your business and what that risk reward is. You don't want to break the law by any stretch of the imagination, but you want to know how far you can push it, and you want to know what you can do with it, and you want to know, what does this really mean for it? So I just kind of wanted to put that caveat. If you guys are looking for an HR partner, go find somebody that understands how you run your business and how you assess your risk, and make sure that they're comfortable talking to you in those terms. So, yeah. So if you've got a person coming in for an interview and you are not sure of their ability to do the job, right? The only thing legally, again, we're going to talk that legal side. The only thing legally that you can do, you can't ask them, how can you do this? You can't say, are you sure you can do that? You can't do those things, but you can say, we need to put you through a jobs ability test, and you need to demonstrate that you can do the job. Now, the catch with that is if they demonstrate that they can do the job, then there's no reason to hire them. And so now you've started down a path. And so be very sure before you do that, that you really want to start down that path. You need to go through your entire interview process, right? And you need to identify, is this a fit for my organization? Is this somebody that meets the culture needs of my organization? Is this somebody that can work the hours that I want worked? Is this somebody that can drive the routes that I want worked? Is this someone that can operate the vehicle that I have for them? Those are all things that you're going to prioritize over any of the physical challenges, because people are amazing and they can overcome a lot. And so you just have to be really mindful that if you go down the path of saying, can you perform the duties of this job, and you let them demonstrate that, then that means you've checked all of those other things off the list. And now you're down a path and you cannot backtrack from that. So I would make sure that that other list, are they a fit? Are they who you want on the culture? Do they have the experience that you want? If they're newbies, do you have the time to train them, right? Do you have a route that works for what they're looking for? Is it the right pay? Is it the right hours? Are they asking? We had somebody today that said, hey, I want to apply for this role, driver role, but the posted ad says you must work weekends. And they immediately came back with, okay, well, I've done the application and I've done all this, but by the way, under Title VII of religion, I can't work on Saturdays. Okay, well, that's a problem, right? We're not going to do that. And they immediately came back and challenged, well, you have to make an accommodation for me because of Title VII. And my response to that is, you are correct in an because there was other things in the email chain, right? You are correct in an organization that runs 7 days a week. It might not be a difficult accommodation to allow to have somebody not work on a Saturday. However, the route that I have and the route that I need is weekends, and it would cause me as the employer undue harm to have to go hire somebody else to now fill the day that you can't do. So you can come back on some of those things. If it's causing you to do something that absolutely is at a detriment to your company, you can say no based on those things. So it's a lot of word games. It's a lot of shades of gray, but you can work through it. But I highly encourage you to use the list on this side that is the fit, the culture for the organization, the days of the week, the size of the truck, the routes that are needed, those kind of things. And if they don't meet those needs, then don't worry about the other things.
Exactly. And I would highly recommend that you all have EPLI just as an extra step of protection. If you don't know what that is, or if you want some help finding someone who is a great provider for that, we're happy to help you.
Let us know.
All right. Okay. Well, we're going to transition now to some open Q&A. We have some questions coming in. And for those of you who have not loaded your questions yet, feel free, click the Q&A, type those in, and we will run through them. So Melody, do you want to look through some and see? Or
sure.
These are all HR related. So I'll field these and I'll kick them over to you so you can focus on your answers.
Okay.
Okay. So our friend Andy Rod, I love Andy's questions every week. They're so good. Okay. So Andy says he is neither a beach nor a lake person. He prefers skiing. And as a fellow HR nightmare with my friend Grace, yes, we are. Melody can attest to that. My question is, when we say to a driver, sorry, we don't have any work for you, it's slow. If we have more deliveries, we'll let you know later. I think he's asking if that's okay to say. He's in Pennsylvania, or if there's a better way to say that, Melody.
Well, I think, so the first thing I would say is, do you really want them back? Right? So that would be the first question, is if you're letting them go, because you don't have work for them and you do want them back, then that sentence is fine. We don't have any work. I don't have anything for you. I want to keep you on the payroll, but it's going to be 0 hours for the next week or so. And I'll call you as soon as I have hours. If it's somebody that you're done with peak and it's slowed down and you don't want them back, don't add the rest of that sentence. Just, unfortunately, we no longer have a route for you. Yeah, you're good to go.
Can you talk a little bit about the risk associated with that situation? Like, are they going to be liable for unemployment? And is there a way to fight that unemployment? And I know state by state is different, but just generally, and then with the caveat of everything we say today, but also consult your local.
Yes. So if you let somebody go because of work reduction, if you reduce their hours because of work reduction, anything to do with reducing their hours or ending their employment because of a slowdown, that makes them eligible for unemployment. Now, have they worked for you long enough to have paid enough into unemployment? Have they been a full-time employee versus a part-time employee? All those other things come into play. But if at the end of the day, you are cutting back their hours, even if it's just a couple of hours all the way down to full termination, if it's due to a reduction in work, they will be eligible for unemployment, and you cannot fight that one. The only way to fight that one is if they quit or if they're being terminated for cause.
Is that true for seasonal too? So like if we post an ad at the beginning of peak hiring and we put in the ad that the lifespan of this position is October through December, and then December comes and goes. Yeah. How does that affect it?
Essentially, at the end of the day, it's going to make them like a part-time employee, and they're not going to have paid enough into unemployment, right? So they're hiring as essentially a part-time basis, even if they're full-time for those hours for that amount of time. In most states, you are just fine because you posted it as seasonal. It's not going to be a long-term thing. You're not offering them benefits. You're not going down that path. And so you're good to go. But you need to make sure that when you send them a, offer letter or an offer text or however that communication is going, that it specifically says seasonal employment, end date, XYZ date, and that you stick to that without fail. You stick to that.
Perfect. Awesome. All right. Melanie has a question here, which is why I said Melanie earlier instead of Melody, because I was reading this. We also have a Melanie here in our office, so it's always
something. That's always okay. We'll answer.
Okay. Melanie says that she is a beach person because she lives on the lake. So
there you go. Nice.
So question, in any state, can I reduce wage for hourly employees if they are milking the hourly rate? For example, $17.50 per hour rate of pay, but anything over 8 hours is at minimum wage if I disclose this.
So that's a really great question. If they've already worked the hours, then no, you can't ever change their wage once they've worked the hours. If you put it up front that over a specific amount of time, then the wage is changed, you can. My question to that is, does everybody milk it? Or do you just have some problem employees that are milking it? Because if you reduce one person's wage at 8 hours, then you have to reduce everybody's. And so you have to be fair and consistent. And so that would be the question that we would have to really dive into, because there's probably other ways that we could come up for you to navigate that. But as a blanket statement, if you disclose it up front, then that means you're going to penalize every single person and hold every single person to that same standard. And I don't know that that's based on the way the question's worded. I don't know that that's really what you want to do.
Yeah. And I would say this is a great example of looking into potentially what state you're in and not having to work overtime, right? And so if you really are in a state where over 8 hours, your rate's going to be the same, it might not be as big of a deal. And I would also probably challenge you to look at maybe an incentive plan for your driver's efficiency versus penalizing them for taking too much time, but looking at more of like a reward system for being more efficient and doing more stops per hour or something like that, maybe they have a higher rate that they can achieve if they do a certain number of stops per hour, right? And so that will increase their efficiency. And we can look at it from that way too. So, okay. So another peak question, Melody. David says he's a beach person all the way. And his question is, what happens at the end of peak when I decide that a particular person isn't someone I want to keep and a newer person is someone that you want to keep? So I think he's talking about, he says, what are the risks for upgrading your roster? So basically replacing an older, more tenured person with a newbie peak rock star.
You don't have to, it doesn't have to be last in, first out at all. And so if somebody new has come in and they're doing the job better, then that's who you want to keep on your team. And so a couple of things that I would say to that is, number one, you can do that at any point in time that you want to do that. What you have to worry about is what's the ripple effect, right? And I'm not saying don't do it. I want you to always keep the rock star, and I want you to always find a way to move the other person out of the team. I just want you to think about, how do I convey this message to my tenured drivers? Hey, I'm not doing out with the old and in with the new kind of thing, right? You want to make sure that you are talking to the team openly about, hey guys, we're looking at what your efficiency ratings are. We're looking at your safety ratings every day. We're looking at how fast and efficient you're getting things done. And we make our decisions every week based on these things. And we're going to do it fairly, and we're going to do it consistently. And so, there's wording that I can give you that you can play with that if you've got somebody specific in mind and you're trying to do those different things. But I think the messaging along the way is, we are always looking at who are our top performers. And it may be the new guy in off the street, and it might be the guy that's been here for 10 years that doesn't take any grief and doesn't take anything. And man, he could knock it out faster than anybody else. You just have to weigh that. But as long as you do it consistently, then your team knows, I have to always be at the top of my game, because I can be out the door quickly if I'm not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think that brings up another really, really great topic to touch on, which is documenting our coachable events. And I'm being very HR appropriate here, Melody, but documenting when drivers do things we don't want them to do, right? Or there are performance issues. And that makes it way easier to do that leveling up that you're talking about in your operation. If you're documenting the things that this driver is doing, has done, that you don't like, that don't keep them in rock star status or don't ever get them to rock star status, it's way easier to replace that driver with someone new who is doing all of the right things, because it can now be performance based, right? Versus just, I thought I was doing a good job and nobody ever talked to me about anything. Nobody ever documented anything. And so now I'm going to file for unemployment, or I'm going to fight this, or I'm going to say this was wrongful termination, or any of those things that just make it a more frustrating and more difficult experience to let somebody go. So if you're documenting along the way, whether or not you end up executing on that and making a change, at least you have it in your arsenal, and it's better to have it and not need it than need it and not have it, for sure.
The only thing I'll add to that is, if you end up with someone that has been a solid performer, maybe they're just a pain in the butt employee, right? And that's one of those times that makes it a little bit harder, because you haven't documented anything. You just know that they are constantly that curmudgeon that's griping about something or doing whatever. And now you have a new employee that's performing at the same, but they're a whole lot nicer to be around. They're a whole lot easier to be around. You can make that decision too. You can say, this is who we want. This is the type of personality that we want on our team. This is the impact we want to make in the community, and representing my brand and representing my business. And your performance may be the same, but at the end of the day, the fit for our culture and the fit for our team lies here and not here. And so that's one of those things too, that even if you haven't documented a performance issue, if you have documented a coaching issue, a coaching opportunity, hey, quit griping. Hey, quit being the negative Nelly, right? Whatever that is, then that still gives you that documentation that Grace was just talking about, that makes those decisions easier.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, I want to go to a question now from Daryl. This one just came in. Daryl said that he likes mountains and lakes in the spring and fall, and beach in the summer. I like that. You can have your cake and eat it too. A little bit of both. Okay, his question is, are there some reasons that when someone is let go, they can't collect unemployment? I agree that documenting issues is key. Well,
Yeah.
there you
Yeah. Okay, well, I love that you like all of the choices and that you agree with documentation. So see, that's just a win for me all the way around. Yeah, there's lots of ways that you can get out of paying unemployment. And I can assure you, I will help you find every single one of them. If you've got a policy in your handbook that says, we can do write-ups or disciplinary action, sorry, just mentally had a moment there, up to and including immediate termination, you're good. And you can fight it all day long. And there's your policy, right? There's your statement. So if they're violating seatbelt laws, if they are not safe drivers, if they are not getting there to the terminal in time for the safety meetings in the mornings, if they are miscoding packages regularly, if they're missing pickups at businesses because they're getting there too late, or they're dropping things off before a scheduled delivery time, all of those things, like you can fight all of those things 100%. And you will win them 99.9% of the time, right? If you do a layoff or you cut back their hours, you will lose that one 99% of the time. But all the others, as long as you've got something in your handbook or you've got a documentation, you've got screenshots of text messages. I'm a huge fan of the field sending me screenshots of text messages, because then I've got it right then and I can just file it away. I don't have to do anything with it unless something comes my way, but I've got a date, a timestamp, it's from them. There's no question. And those are great.
Yeah, awesome. All right. I'm going to go to a couple of other questions that might not be as HR related. Actually, we've got one more. Okay, so this is from Mike, and Mike is saying that he says all beach all the time. So there's his answer to question of the day. But then he's asking, can we go over the 10,000 pound overtime rule? So I'll do a brief overview of that, and then Melody, if you have anything else you want to add to it, feel free. But Mike, basically the rule is sent by FMCSA, or it's set by FMCSA. So there is an FMCSA exemption where you are not liable to pay overtime to your drivers if they are operating vehicles over 10,000 pound gross vehicle weight. There are some states that have laws that supersede that, and you will have to pay overtime. I'm sure Melody could give you some examples of those. But most states out there, you can lean on that exemption. And if your drivers are in anything from a transit dually up to a straight truck, you're going to work within those bounds of 10,000 plus to, just under 26,000 pounds. And so you will not be liable for overtime. If your drivers are in something smaller, so a smaller transit ProMaster, anything smaller than that is under 10,000 pounds, you will have to pay overtime to those drivers. One really important caveat to this is it doesn't matter on a daily basis. You have to look at it weekly. So if one of your drivers spends one day, even 2 hours in an under 10,000 pound vehicle, overtime will apply for the full pay period, right? So that full week, if you pay weekly. And so they have to be in an over 10,000 pound vehicle for the whole pay period to get that exemption and for overtime to not be assessed. Anything you want to add there, Melody?
No, I was just going to say, to your point, there are some states that have different wage requirements, right? And so like New Mexico is one that has a different overtime rule, regardless of the size of truck. And so if they're staying within the state, then they could be eligible for overtime. If you've got if you're in Colorado, if they don't cross state lines, they can be eligible for overtime. And so you just have to figure out those state laws for that. But in general, your Fair Labor Standards Act is again, we're back to the federal law says one thing and state law says something else. And so federal sets the guidelines, and state laws can always go more in favor of the employer or the employee, or, you know, whatever. And so you just have to do your legwork. And it gets really, really tricky if they start crossing state lines. And so you've just got to pay attention. So Grace's example of working 2 hours in a, you know, smaller truck is key. If they cross state lines literally just for one delivery and go back, that can complicate things. So you really have to be mindful of the routes and where they're going.
Yep. Really good point there. Okay. One question that just came in. We're going to go to an attendee who says beach all the way for me. And then their question is, can you use a text message as an official write-up?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I'm that HR person that will tell you, I'll take it on a napkin. I will take it on a text message. I will take it scribbled on a piece of paper. I will take it. And so if you have sent a driver a text message that said, you were late again, this is your last shot, right? Or why are you not here? We're doing roll call for safety meetings, right? Or, hey, I'm looking on the camera, you don't have your seatbelt on. Put the damn thing on, right? All of that counts. Every single one of it. It all counts.
Perfect.
It doesn't have to be fancy, and they don't have to sign it. And for the record, just since I thought of that one, if you do make it fancy and you do put it on the document and you do put it in front of them, they still don't have to sign it. So you're not saving yourself one way or the other. It's nicer if you have it written out and you can formally put on there, they declined to sign, but it doesn't make it better. You know, it doesn't save you one way or the other. So do it however you can get it. Perfect.
And that's so important in this space, because I've had times where I've been in a terminal and all I can find is a paper towel, you know, from the bathroom. And I've done that on the paper towel and writing it that way. And, or I'll leave it in a driver's seat. And that's really all I have at my disposal at the time. So, have to be flexible in this space and think outside the box and be creative. So for those of you who are prospective investors, we may be scaring you a little bit for what you're walking into, but this is nitty gritty and you got to be willing to roll with it. So that's a really good
fun with it. Like, it doesn't have to be, just have some fun with it. Go, okay, what is the nonsense that I'm going to have to learn in this state to make this successful and make this work the way I want it to work? And there's always a way.
Yep, I agree. Okay, this one is not specifically HR related, but I want to touch on it really quick. So we have an attendee who is asking, how are you able to get a proper assessment of a business if they have multiple contracts and their expenses are all intertwined with each other? This is a great question. And something that we really specialize in at Route Consultant is what we call carve outs. And so carving out a business to really see what a piece of it does is something that we've done for years and years and years. And because we have been contractors in the space for a very long time, we know what we're looking at, and we can pretty easily parse through that and help you get as clean of a look at the business as possible. But for those of you who are current contractors, this is a great thing to keep in mind and to hopefully motivate you to work with a bookkeeper who can really help categorize stuff and keep it siloed for your individual operations. If you do have multiple operations, it's always so much easier to sell your business and to sell your business quickly if you have clean books and financials, and the expenses that go with operation in Nashville, Tennessee are in, one silo, and the expenses and the revenue that go with your operation in Austin, Texas are in another silo, right? So if you don't already have that sectioned out, definitely consider in 2023 working with a bookkeeper who can help you get that allocated properly, so that if you do decide to sell your business, you can do it quickly and you can get a better valuation and a cleaner valuation on that. But certainly we can help do a carve out and take a look at a business, even if they're not in that clean, siloed out condition. All right. So we'll end on one just funny note here, because we're almost out of time. But Daryl, who asked the unemployment question, gave us a follow-up note to his question. And he said, I just wanted to add to my unemployment question. In New York, someone was let go because they missed 3 days because they were drinking and could not come in. Unemployment allowed them to collect because the drinking problem was considered a medical issue. So just a reminder that there are some crazies out there, not the people, the laws, some crazy laws out there that you just make you scratch your head at times and say, what the heck am I working with? But that is par for the course, and you'll run into those things, but soon you will understand and you will believe that nothing will surprise you in HR world. And if there are things that you run into or you need help with or guidance with, we are happy to help you. Obviously, after this hour, you know that Melody is an expert, and she is definitely someone who can be in your corner and help you walk through any of these things that you're trying to figure out, navigate, whether you're a current contractor or prospective. We'd love to talk to you and help you figure some of these things out. So anybody who has lingering questions, feel free to send them to the team and we will tackle them. And we will see you guys next week. Thank you for jumping in this week, Melody. And as always, it was very fun. And we will see you guys soon.
Bye, guys. Thanks.
Bye.